The Texan sun, an indifferent golden eye, began its slow ascent over Lubbock, casting long, skeletal shadows across the scrubland. A fine, persistent dust, the ever-present companion of this arid landscape, danced in the nascent light, swirling around the weathered boots of Ethan McCready. It was a morning like countless others, yet today held an unspoken tension, a quiet hum beneath the familiar cadence of the rising day. Ethan, a man whose face was etched with the lines of sun, wind, and profound sorrow, stood surveying his pasture. His gaze, usually fixed on the distant horizon or the well-worn leather of his saddle, now rested on an anomaly, a colossal anthill, a reddish-brown mound rising like an alien structure, relentlessly encroaching further onto his grazing land. He was unaware, as he planned its dismantling, of the ancient, forgotten secret that lay slumbering deep within its earthen core, waiting for the disturbance to awaken it. Ethan McCready was a name synonymous with the McCready Ranch, a sprawling, albeit humble, expanse of land that had felt the tireless toil of his family for generations. Life had dealt him a harsh hand. Widowed young, he had carried the ghost of his beloved wife, Sarah, in the quiet chambers of his heart for decades. Her laughter, once the bright melody of the ranch, had faded into a soft echo in the wind. This profound loss had sculpted him into a man of quiet stoicism, his emotions rarely visible, hidden beneath a gruff exterior and a meticulous adherence to routine. He was a relic in many ways of a bygone era, a true cowboy in a world that was slowly forgetting the rhythm of the land. His hands, gnarled and strong, told stories of mending fences, birthing calves, and taming the wild spirit of the Texas plains. His life was a stark testament to self-reliance, punctuated by the silent companionship of his one true friend, Dusty. Dusty, a magnificent mustang with a coat the color of dried mesquite and eyes that held the wisdom of the wild, was more than just a horse to Ethan. He was a confidant, a shadow, an extension of Ethan's own solitary spirit. Together, they navigated the challenges of ranching, their silent understanding a testament to years of shared hardship and unwavering loyalty. In Dusty's powerful presence, Ethan found a quiet solace, a connection that transcended words. The ranch, its vast, silent beauty, and the unassuming loyalty of his Mustang were Ethan's anchors in a world that had otherwise felt like a relentless tide of loss and solitude. He was a man deeply connected to the earth beneath his feet, attuned to its subtle shifts, its whispers, and its sometimes unpredictable demands. The colossal anthill, an industrious monument to nature's relentless progress, had become more than just an inconvenience. It was an imposition. It represented a small but growing disorder in Ethan's carefully structured world. He believed in order, in keeping things just so, a conviction born from the chaos his personal life had endured. Clearing the anthill was therefore not merely a chore, but an act of restoration, a small triumph against the encroaching wildness that sometimes threatened to overwhelm his quiet existence. He envisioned the satisfaction of seeing the pasture reclaimed, a familiar patch of green devoid of the reddish blight. It was a simple, tangible goal, a task he could control, unlike the unpredictable currents of life and loss. He hitched up his old tractor, the engine sputtering to life with a familiar groan, a sound that usually signified a day of honest, predictable labor. As he drove towards the towering mound, a sense of purpose settled over him, the quiet determination of a man facing a known adversary. He felt the familiar weight of his own experience, the ingrained knowledge of the land, guiding his hands on the wheel. He had no premonition, no inkling, that this routine act would unearth a truth long buried, a secret that had lain dormant for over half a century, waiting for a cowboy and his mustang to disturb its slumber. Before we delve deeper into Ethan's world and the extraordinary mystery that awaits him beneath the dust of Lubbock, remember to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories from the heart of the Old West. The morning sun, already fierce, beat down on Ethan McCready as he began the arduous task of dismantling the colossal anthill. His shovel bit into the reddish-brown earth, sending plumes of dust into the still air. It was a familiar rhythm, the grunt of effort, the scrape of metal, the thud of displaced soil. Yet something felt different today, a subtle undercurrent that prickled at his senses. He worked steadily, his mind focused on the physical labor, a welcome distraction from the quiet ache of his solitary life. Dusty, his faithful mustang, usually a picture of calm vigilance, began to show signs of agitation. The horse whickered softly, then pawed at the ground, a restless energy building in his powerful frame. Ethan paused, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a gloved hand. He knew Dusty well. Such behavior was unusual, a clear signal that something was amiss. The mustang's ears swiveled, his dark eyes fixed intensely on a particular spot some yards away, directly beneath where the largest mound of the anthill had been. Trusting his horse's instincts implicitly, Ethan walked over, his boots crunching on the dry grass. Dusty nudged the ground with his muzzle, then pawed again, his hoof uncovering a small section of a peculiar, darker soil. Intrigued, Ethan knelt, pushing away the loose earth with his hands. What he found wasn't rock or root, but something man-made, a faint outline beneath the disturbed surface. With renewed vigor, he grabbed his shovel, carefully widening the excavation. Slowly, an ancient secret began to reveal itself. First, the edges of weathered wooden planks emerged, dark with age and moisture, forming a crude lid. Beneath them, encased in what appeared to be rust-eaten tin containers, lay a hidden cache. His heart began to pound with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. This was no ordinary find. This was a deliberate concealment, a vault of forgotten memories. He worked meticulously, prying open the brittle wood. Inside the makeshift vault, nestled amidst layers of dried dirt and decaying fabric, he discovered a treasure trove of the past. Faded photographs, their edges curled and brittle, depicted smiling faces from a bygone era, their expressions frozen in time. Tattered letters, penned in elegant, looping script, spoke of love, longing, and an unsettling undercurrent of fear. And then, the worn journal. Its leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowed with age, but the ink remained surprisingly legible. As Ethan carefully turned the pages of the journal, a tragic story began to unfold, a narrative of disappearances that had haunted the surrounding communities for 51 years. The entries were sparse at first, then gained intensity, detailing whispers of people vanishing without a trace, hushed rumors that had circulated through the dusty towns of Lubbock and beyond decades ago. He remembered hearing snippets of these old tales growing up, ghost stories more than history, dismissed as rural folklore. But now, held in his hands, was undeniable evidence that they were terribly real. The journal didn't name names directly in the initial entries, but it painted a vivid picture of a community gripped by fear, a pervasive sense of unease that had settled over the land like a perpetual storm cloud. The author, a keen observer, documented the growing suspicion, the unanswered questions, the silent grief that festered beneath the surface of everyday life. Ethan felt a chill despite the Texas heat. The seemingly mundane act of clearing an anthill had unearthed not just objects, but a long-buried truth, a profound injustice that had festered for half a century. He continued to sift through the contents, each photograph, each phrase in the letters, each entry in the journal, adding another piece to the fragmented puzzle. The faces in the pictures were young, vibrant, full of life, making their eventual fate all the more poignant. Some of the letters hinted at a larger, more sinister force at play, veiled warnings and desperate pleas for help that had evidently gone unheeded. Ethan's initial excitement morphed into a deep-seated unease, a sense of responsibility settling upon his shoulders. He had stumbled upon something monumental, a secret that had lain dormant, waiting patiently beneath the earth for someone to finally listen to its silent scream. The air around him suddenly felt heavier, charged with the weight of decades of unspoken pain. News of Ethan's incredible discovery spread through the tight-knit rural community like wildfire, carried on the whispers of the wind and amplified by the hum of anxious conversations across dusty fields. It was an inevitability in a town as small and interconnected as theirs, where every significant event, no matter how personal, quickly became community property. The revelation of the hidden cache beneath the colossal anthill wasn't merely a local curiosity. It was a seismic jolt, cracking open the placid surface of their shared history. Old wounds, thought long since scabbed over, began to bleed anew, and long-held suspicions, previously relegated to hushed tones and knowing glances, resurfaced with an undeniable, uncomfortable clarity. The names of the disappeared, once spoken only in hushed memorials, were now uttered with a raw urgency, demanding answers after 5 decades of silence. Some villagers, particularly the younger generations who had only heard fragmented tales, were consumed by a fervent eagerness for understanding. They pressed Ethan, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination, for every detail, poring over the faded photographs and cryptic journal entries as if they held the key to their own identities. They saw in this unearthed history not just a mystery, but a chance to right an old wrong, to bring a modicum of peace to restless souls and their grieving descendants. Yet others, particularly those with deep roots in the area, the elders whose memories stretched back to those tragic events 51 years ago, reacted with a strange, almost unsettling reluctance. Their faces, etched with the passage of time and the weight of unspoken knowledge, often clouded over when the topic arose. They would shift uneasily, their gazes darting away, offering vague platitudes or outright warnings about disturbing the past. It was as if they feared what new horrors might emerge from the shadows, or perhaps they were protecting secrets of their own, complicit in a silence that had endured for far too long. The journal entries, in particular, offered tantalizing yet frustratingly vague hints. They spoke not only of the disappearances, but subtly alluded to the powerful local family, the Blackwoods, a clan whose influence had been woven into the very fabric of the community for generations. Their land stretched for miles, their name synonymous with prosperity, and some whispered, an unshakable grip on local affairs. The journal suggested a connection, an involvement that went beyond mere proximity, implying a protective, almost possessive, stance towards the events of that fateful year. Ethan felt a growing pressure, a tangible weight settling upon his shoulders. He was torn, caught between his innate desire for justice, that deep-seated cowboy's code of righting wrongs, and an equally profound loyalty to the established traditions and unspoken codes of his community. He had always respected the boundaries, the quiet agreements that maintained peace in this remote corner of Texas. Now, those boundaries seemed arbitrary, almost oppressive. He grappled internally with the immense weight of the secret he had accidentally uncovered. Every word he read, every faded image he examined, brought the chilling realization that pursuing the truth could shatter the fragile peace that had settled over Lubbock for half a century. It could expose uncomfortable truths about respected families, upend long-held assumptions, and challenge his own position within the delicate social ecosystem of his home. Was he willing to be the catalyst for such upheaval? Was he prepared to face the inevitable backlash from those who preferred the past to remain buried, including potentially powerful figures like the Blackwoods? He questioned the depth of his commitment to tradition, to the placid surface of community harmony, versus his innate sense of right and wrong, that unyielding moral compass that had always guided him. The simple act of clearing an anthill had evolved into a profound moral dilemma, placing him at the crossroads of personal conviction and societal expectation, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that there was no turning back from the path he had inadvertently stumbled upon. Driven by this growing sense of responsibility, Ethan began his own quiet investigation, a methodical, almost academic approach to the unsettling puzzle. He pored over the journal entries, cross-referencing names and dates with old newspaper clippings he found in the dusty archives of the Lubbock Public Library, and even faded entries in the county's Historical Society records. Each fragment of information, no matter how small, was carefully considered, fitted into the larger tapestry of the past. He learned specific turns of phrase, local idioms used by the journal's author, and recognized the subtle ways gossip traveled through a close-knit community. His days became a blend of ranch chores and historical detective work, his mind constantly turning over the implications of each newly discovered detail. His efforts did not go unnoticed. As he subtly inquired about long-forgotten events or casually mentioned the names from the journal, he encountered more than just reluctance. There was a palpable shift in the air, a subtle but definite change in the demeanor of certain individuals, particularly those connected, however distantly, to the Blackwood family. Conversations would abruptly halt when he approached. Eyes that had once held a friendly glint now narrowed with suspicion or averted entirely. He received veiled threats, not overt declarations, but rather carefully worded warnings delivered with a disarming smile, suggesting that some secrets were best left undisturbed for the sake of community peace. "Some things are just better off buried, Ethan," one old-timer had muttered, his gaze fixed on a distant horizon. "For everyone's good." The implication was clear. Poking around could have consequences, not just for him, but for the fragile harmony of their small world. The powerful Blackwood clan, through their intricate web of influence and their long-standing reputation, indeed became the primary obstacle. They didn't directly confront Ethan, which was perhaps more unsettling. Instead, their silence, their implied warnings, and the palpable tension that permeated the conversations around them created an almost invisible wall. It was a wall built on fear, respect, and generations of unspoken understandings. They didn't need to speak. Their unspoken presence, their control over key aspects of local life, from land deeds to bank loans, was enough. It suggested that unearthing the truth could be dangerous, not just to their reputation, but potentially to Ethan's very way of life. He learned that the Blackwoods had always been formidable, their wealth and status granting them an almost untouchable aura. Questions about the 51-year-old disappearances were simply not asked in their presence. Undeterred, Ethan tried a different approach. He sought out older members of the community who lived on the fringes, men and women who, perhaps, had less to lose, or whose memories were sharper and less encumbered by alliances. He shared snippets of the journal entries, gauging their reactions. Some still clammed up, intimidated by the lingering shadow of the Blackwoods, but others, with a lifetime of stories etched into their faces, began to open up, albeit cautiously. He learned about the Blackwood family's deep-seated history, their arrival in Lubbock generations ago, and their rapid accumulation of land and power. He heard tales of their fierce, protective nature, how they guarded their family name and interests with an almost ruthless efficiency. These conversations solidified his understanding of the formidable forces at play, the deeply entrenched power structure he was unwittingly challenging. Each hushed revelation, each hesitant memory, painted a clearer picture of a family accustomed to getting their way, controlling narratives, and ensuring that their version of history prevailed. Ethan knew he was treading on sacred, dangerous ground. As Ethan delved deeper, the pressure intensified, a subtle but pervasive force that began to encroach on his quiet existence. He started receiving anonymous calls, brief, unsettling silences on the other end, followed by a click. More overtly, he noticed vehicles with tinted windows idling near his property line for extended periods, their occupants unseen, but their presence a clear message. The warnings were no longer veiled. They were direct, delivered through intermediaries at the feed store or the local diner, always with the same underlying threat. Some things are best left undisturbed, McCready. His resolve, though strong, was tested. The safety of his ranch, the very sanctuary he had built with his own hands, now felt compromised. He found himself checking the locks more often, scanning the horizon with a heightened sense of vigilance. Even Dusty, his steadfast mustang, seemed to sense the shift, becoming more skittish, whinnying at shadows that hadn't bothered him before. One evening, after a long day of following a cold lead, Ethan returned to find a gate to his pasture inexplicably open, a few of his cattle wandering perilously close to the highway. It was a minor incident, easily rectified, but the message was clear. Someone was watching, and they were willing to cross lines. The personal stakes of his quest had escalated dramatically, moving from a moral obligation to a direct threat to his livelihood and peace of mind. Just when the isolation and the weight of the opposition threatened to overwhelm him, an unexpected ally emerged from the periphery of his investigation. It was Martha Gable, an elderly woman whose small, weathered farmhouse sat a few miles down the dusty road, almost forgotten by the changing world. Ethan had initially visited her out of a vague hope, knowing she was a distant cousin to one of the disappeared families, but expecting little more than hushed condolences. Instead, He found a woman whose eyes still held the spark of fierce intelligence, despite the decades of waiting. Martha had lived with the shadow of her cousin's disappearance for 51 years, a quiet grief that had hardened into an unshakable conviction. She hadn't spoken openly before, fearing the repercussions from the powerful Blackwood family, but Ethan's persistent yet respectful inquiries stirred something within her. "I've waited half a century for someone to care enough to ask the right questions, Ethan," she declared, her voice thin but firm, as she ushered him into her dimly lit parlor. She pulled out a small, intricately embroidered handkerchief, unraveling a series of yellowed newspaper clippings, and a faded daguerreotype of her cousin, a young woman with a hopeful, almost defiant smile. Martha shared stories, whispered anecdotes, and pointed out inconsistencies in the official narrative that Ethan's journal entries had only hinted at. She recounted how the Blackwoods had swiftly silenced any local inquiries, how their word had been law, and how fear had kept many mouths shut. Her insights were crucial, not just for the details they provided, but for the profound courage they demonstrated. She spoke of her cousin's independent spirit, her burgeoning romance with a ranch hand who had also vanished, and a contentious land dispute involving the Blackwoods that had predated the disappearances. Martha's unwavering determination, born from decades of silent suffering and a burning desire for truth, bolstered Ethan's own resolve. He realized he wasn't alone in this burden. He was carrying the hopes of those who had been silenced, those who had grieved in secret for too long. With Martha's support and the mounting undeniable evidence meticulously gathered from the anthill cache and his own diligent inquiries, Ethan knew he could no longer remain silent. The time for quiet investigation was over. He had enough pieces to paint a damning picture, a narrative that would shatter the fragile peace of the community and expose the deep-seated corruption that had festered for generations. He felt a profound shift within him. The internal wrestling match between tradition and justice finally decided. He understood that a confrontation was inevitable, and it wouldn't be a private affair. It would be a public reckoning, a pivotal moment that would forever alter the landscape of Lubbock. And he, the quiet cowboy who had stumbled upon a secret, was now ready to lead the charge. The storm was coming, and he was prepared to face it head-on. The tension in Lubbock had become a palpable weight, a suffocating blanket woven from suppressed histories and unspoken fears. Ethan, having endured weeks of veiled threats and unsettling warnings, knew the moment had arrived. He couldn't equivocate, couldn't delay. The evidence, painstakingly gathered from the dusty cache and corroborated by the trembling recollections of his elderly ally, Martha, was too compelling, too damning, to ignore. The town hall, usually reserved for mundane county meetings and spirited debates about cattle prices, was packed, a sea of anxious faces reflecting the simmering unease. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Ethan, with Martha at his side, strode to the makeshift podium. His gaze swept over the familiar faces, finally locking with that of Jeremiah Blackwood, the patriarch, whose steely eyes betrayed a flicker of something akin to fear beneath his usual veneer of unyielding authority. 51 years ago, Ethan's voice resonated, clear and steady, cutting through the nervous murmuring. 3 souls vanished from this community. We were told it was an accident, a tragic disappearance. But the earth, it remembers, and sometimes it gives up its secrets. He held aloft a brittle, yellowed photograph, a smiling young woman, Martha's cousin. "This is Clara," he announced, his voice tinged with a quiet reverence. "She was last seen near the old Blackwood timber mill, the very land where this anthill, the one we all ignored for decades, stood guard over a terrible truth." He then placed the tarnished metal box from the cache onto the table. From it, he carefully extracted the journal, its worn cover a testament to its age. He read aloud, not sensationalizing, but letting the stark, unvarnished words of Clara's own brother, a mill worker, paint a horrifying picture. The journal detailed a heated argument between Clara and a younger Jeremiah, then just a hot-headed young man, over stolen timber rights and a forged land deed. It spoke of a struggle, a desperate plea, and then a chilling silence. There was no mention of outright murder, but the brothers' final entry detailed Clara being dragged away by Blackwood's men, never to be seen again, along with 2 other workers who had witnessed the confrontation. The revelations hit the community like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted, followed by a furious clamor. Jeremiah Blackwood, initially attempting to dismiss Ethan's account as the ramblings of a meddling cowboy, found his carefully constructed facade crumbling. His initial defiance, a practiced sneer, began to falter as Ethan meticulously laid out the facts, cross-referencing journal entries with faded shipping manifests from the old mill, unearthed with Martha's help. The crowd, once merely curious, was now a jury, their collective gaze unblinking, accusatory. Martha, frail but resolute, then delivered her testimony, her voice trembling but clear, recounting her family's desperate, fruitless search and the subsequent intimidation they faced, warnings to stay silent, to accept the official story. Jeremiah Blackwood's face grew ashen. The weight of 51 years of silence, of reputation built on a lie, pressed down on him. He stammered, attempting to deflect, to discredit, but the sheer volume of evidence, combined with Martha's heartbreaking sincerity, rendered his efforts futile. Finally, his shoulders slumped, a deep, shuddering sigh escaping him. "It was an accident," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper, the bravado completely gone. "Clara, she fell. The others, they saw. We had to protect the family name, the land. It was all we had." His confession, forced and unwilling, still served as a powerful revelation. It wasn't just a simple disappearance. It was a desperate cover-up, born of a moment of impulsive violence, then perpetuated by fear and a ruthless determination to protect family wealth and reputation. The community was left reeling, their long-held perceptions shattered, the comfortable myths of their past brutally exposed. The truth, ugly and painful, had finally emerged from the dust. The raw, unvarnished truth hung heavy in the air, a shroud over the stunned faces of the community. Jeremiah Blackwood's whispered confession, however incomplete, had torn open a wound that had festered for decades. The initial shock quickly gave way to a wave of murmurs, then hushed conversations, as families processed the brutal reality. For some, it was a vindication, the confirmation of long-held suspicions and whispered tales. For others, particularly those who had benefited from the Blackwood family's influence over the years, there was a visible struggle between loyalty and the undeniable weight of the evidence. Justice, though delayed, had finally begun its slow, deliberate crawl. In the days that followed, the legal wheels, long dormant, began to turn with renewed vigor. The journal, the photographs, the shipping manifests, and Martha's powerful testimony provided crucial foundations for a reinvestigation. While the full legal repercussions for Jeremiah Blackwood remained to be seen, The court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. The Blackwood name, once synonymous with power and respect in Lubbock, was now irrevocably tainted. Clara and the two other mill workers, whose lives had been erased from history for over half a century, were finally acknowledged. A makeshift memorial, a simple wooden cross adorned with wildflowers, appeared near the site of the old mill, a silent testament to lives tragically lost and finally mourned. The community, though fractured by the revelations, began the difficult process of healing, confronting the shadows of its past. For Ethan, the immediate aftermath brought a profound, if quiet, sense of relief. He had faced down powerful forces, navigating a landscape riddled with unspoken threats and a deeply ingrained reluctance to disturb the status quo. His moral compass, unwavering despite the pressure, had guided him through the labyrinth of secrets and lies. The burden of the confidential knowledge, which had weighed heavily on him, was now shared, exposed to the light of day. He had honored the past, not with a thirst for vengeance, but with a quiet determination to bring peace to troubled souls, both living and departed. The elderly Martha, her eyes no longer haunted, found a measure of solace in the public acknowledgment of her cousin's fate. She visited Ethan often, bringing him homemade pies and sharing stories of Clara, ensuring that her memory was not just of a victim, but of a vibrant young woman. Ethan's journey had reinforced his deep connection to the land and its people, but now, with a renewed sense of purpose and integrity. He was no longer just the stoic, solitary cowboy, but a man who had stared into the heart of darkness and emerged with the truth. The ranch, his sanctuary, felt different now, imbued with a quiet dignity. Dusty, his loyal mustang, still grazed contentedly in the pasture, occasionally nudging Ethan with his head, a constant, comforting presence. The giant anthill, once a symbol of an unchallenged, encroaching force, was gone, replaced by a patch of freshly tilled earth, ready for new growth. The dust eventually settled, physically and metaphorically. The landscape of Ethan's life, and indeed that of Lubbock itself, had been irrevocably changed. The old ways, the silent agreements, the fear of challenging powerful families had been shaken to their core. A new foundation, built on truth and accountability, was slowly beginning to form. Ethan would continue his solitary life, but with a profound understanding that even in the quietest corners of the world, a single act of courage can unearth a hidden past and pave the way for a more just future. The Texas sun still beat down, vast and unyielding, but under its gaze, the community of Lubbock had been forced to look inward, to reckon with its history, and to hope for a brighter, more honest tomorrow. If you were moved by Ethan's courageous journey to uncover a decades-old secret, give this video a like and share it with others. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of courage,